as I read and read and read, and I look on various blog sites and websites and so forth, I got to thinking. People talk about, and many people are talking about and writing about, the coming Civil War. Victor Davis Hanson has written about it. Others. I've talked about it. I talked about it during the Tea Party, the height of the Tea Party movement. Other people poo-poo this kind of talk. Let me tell you what's going on. Prior to the Reagan era, the effort to push back on statist progressivism was almost non-existent. There were a few people, a few intellectuals, a few books, a few magazines that did it. Bo Buckley leading the way. The nomination of Barry Goldwater, so forth. There was some excellent books. But it wasn't really until Reagan that the pushback began. And then after the Reagan presidency, where he built a foundation based on the principles of Americanism, that once again the establishment, in this case the subsequent Bush administration, and then of course the Bush 43 administration, reverted back to the old Republican progressivism of Theodore Roosevelt in many respects. They abandoned Reagan conservatism. The spending that occurred, at least in that time under the Bush administration, was enormous. I don't believe he ever vetoed a spending bill. If he did, it was maybe one. The government massively increased, followed by Barack Obama. The government not only massively increased, but Barack Obama was into fundamentally transforming America into this Ameritopia based on statist progressivism. The Tea Party rose up at the end of the Bush administration, George W. Bush, and the beginning of the Obama administration. It didn't rise up just because of the election of Obama. It rose spontaneously because of decade after decade of statist progressivism. And many citizens across the country, many of you, then and now, and I, realize that we've reached a point that we must push back. We must push back because there are elements and forces within our society that want to take us even further, away from our constitutional system, away from our founding principles, and away from private property and capitalism. If you think this is just something to debate and discuss, and that's very, very important, ideas are crucial. But if you think that's it, that's not correct. You need activists. You need organizations. You need strategies. You need tactics. You need resources. You need people on the ground. You need a grassroots. We always talk about ideas here. I write about ideas in all my books. And those ideas need to be husbanded into action. And some people, I think, liberal, conservative, whatever you want to call them, they sit at their desk and they intellectualize this, which is fine. We do that too. But they don't really get it. It's really not about persuading statist progressive intellectuals that they're wrong. It's really not about persuading them to join us. It's really not about persuading Chuck Schumer that he's wrong, because Chuck Schumer is not operating from a rational position. He's operating from a position where he seeks power, and he's power hungry. And many other people, the same thing, in different walks of life. So what we're trying to do is both intellectually and from a grassroots perspective, organize people who still believe in our founding principles. It's fascinating that the left, and they do this all the time, has stolen our nomenclature, the resistance. What are they resisting exactly? They've created this federal leviathan. They've created the welfare state. They've created the notion of redistribution of wealth within a free society. What is it that they're resisting? They are resisting your pushback. You see, the way I view it, this statist progressivism is a counter-revolution to the American Revolution. How do I know that? Because the earliest intellectuals in that movement told us so. They rejected the Declaration, and they abhor the Constitution. They've written about it. I've written about them in my latest book, Rediscovering Americanism and the Tyranny of Progressivism. We must not be Pollyannas in the face of what's taking place in this country. This country is too important. Our security as individuals is too important. The civil society is too important. I don't particularly care what some of the people on quote-unquote the other side have to say. And we have to have civil debate. We're all about civil debate. We're also about civil activism. The Tea Party was civil activism. The rise and election of Ronald Reagan was civil activism. There's no Antifa equivalent in the conservative movement or in the Republican Party. Republicans and conservatives aren't going around on college campuses insisting that only certain people with certain viewpoints should speak, or that there should be a monopoly on commencement speakers. Republicans and conservatives aren't doing that. Republicans and conservatives don't control the vast majority of so-called free speech that takes place in the media today. There's a couple of outlets. But the overwhelming, the vast majority of these outlets in no way reflect Republican or conservative viewpoints. And so there's this pushback. Now, we can go quietly into the land of Ameritopia. We can go quietly into the land where the Bill of Rights are eviscerated, quietly into the land of centralized autocracy, or we can fight it. I'm not talking about guns and knives. I'm talking about fight it, organize against it. This is why I've written the books that I've written. The first book I ever wrote was called Men in Black. It was about the tyranny of judicial activists and activist courts. What else can you say? How else do you define it? It was the biggest selling book on the Supreme Court 20, 30, 40 years. The next book I wrote, of course, was Rescuing Sprite, probably my favorite book. The third book I wrote was Liberty and Tyranny. Liberty and Tyranny, a book that had always been in the back of my mind, but was particularly poignant given events that were taking place. And I wrote that book over a 16-month period. After I would work at Landmark Legal Foundation as president on the weekends, I would work on the book. Late at night, I would work till 2 or 3 in the morning on the book, did all the research, all the writing, which I always do all the writing. And I finished that book and I said, well, I don't know if anybody's going to be interested, anybody's going to buy it, but I think it makes an important case for conservatism and anti-conservatism. For the former against the latter. The book exploded into the culture. It sold 1.5 million copies in all forms. It came out as the Tea Party was just given birth. It was a book that Tea Party activists read. It was a book that Tea Party activists brought to their rallies. Jeffrey Lord wrote at the American Spectator that it was one of the most important books, period. And it had an enormous effect. I know what it means to make the case for ideas, but I also know what it means to organize, to be activists. That is, do more than talk. After I wrote Liberty and Tyranny, I'm doing this for a reason. After I wrote Liberty and Tyranny, I wrote a book called Ameritopia, going into some of the great philosophers from whom our founders and framers borrowed their ideas, and some of the not-so-great philosophers who serve as the foundational thinkers for these statist progressives. Then I said, okay, but we need more than that. What can we do? We keep voting Republicans. We keep doing what good citizens do as activists. There was this idea in Article 5 of our Constitution that there's two ways to amend the Constitution. I bet you didn't know there's really three ways to amend the Constitution. One of the ways is completely illegitimate, and that is the Supreme Court, which constantly rewrites the Constitution. That is tyrannical. Goes back to my first book. But the framers provided two legitimate ways for amending the Constitution. It can be initiated by Congress, or it can be initiated by the state legislatures. All the amendments to the Constitution have been initiated by Congress. None of them, up till now, have been initiated by the states. Now we have people, so-called conservatives, who object to that. They believe the only way that we should be able to amend the Constitution is through the Congress. Well, we're not going to amend it to have term limits, to limit borrowing, to limit taxes, to limit spending, to limit regulations. That is, to limit the power that Congress has seized for itself and then provided to these departments and agencies that it has created. The idea that we're going to be able to limit them by waiting for Congress to give us a chance to fix the situation is, of course, nonsensical, irrational. Absolutely irrational. And so, I wrote the Liberty Amendments. I used to be opposed to the notion of a Convention of States, and I actually studied it. It is quintessential federalism. And it's in the Constitution. And it was put there for a reason. As a matter of fact, James Madison, who could see the coming bloody Civil War as states, slave states and free states, were starting to battle with each other, not militarily, but in the press and so forth, he pointed to Article 5 Convention of States as a way to address this in order to avoid a civil war. Hamilton refers to it in the Federalist Papers, even though initially he was not all that fond of it. Initially I wasn't fond of it. Now I'm very fond of it. So we wrote the Liberty Amendments, and that helped spur another movement with what's headed by Mark Meckler and others at the Convention of States organization. And so you and I have been involved in a number of movements here, the Tea Party movement and the Convention of State movement. Then I thought to myself, okay, we've dealt with the philosophical. We've dealt with the Constitution. How about we get to some real facts about what's happening to our government and the implication for our children, grandchildren, and generations yet born, because it is dire. Absolutely dire. The debt, unfunded liabilities, they're out of control, and they will crush the society. So particularly for younger people and parents and grandparents who care, I wrote Plunder and Deceit. Every one of these are New York Times #1 bestsellers. Then finally, I'm not doing Mark, This Is Your Life. Stick with me. I may have to take a break, but I'm going to explain it in a minute. Then the last book I wrote was Rediscovering Americanism and the Tyranny of Progressivism. Well, where did we get these principles from in the Declaration of Independence? What do they mean? Why are they so important? And it's time to better define who it is that we're battling. The counter-revolutionaries. Who are they? Where do they get their ideas from? Who are their intellectuals? To lay it out even more boldly than in Ameritopia. Now, why is all this important? I'll explain when I return. We'll be right back. The point I'm trying to make is this. The battle of ideas is absolutely critical. I mean, I should know. We should know, right? Because we talk about ideas all the time here. And I write about them. Every book I've written is about ideas. But it doesn't end there. That's not enough. Tyranny does exist. It exists in the world. It exists in the hearts of certain individuals. And free societies do not survive in perpetuity. The founders of this country understood that. The framers of the Constitution understood that. And we need to understand that. And so it's important to be passionate. Wise, but passionate. It's important to have a base of people in this country who share our values, our principles, and our belief systems. It's not enough to talk. You have to act. Responsibly, but you have to act. I'll be right back. Let us continue. Let us go to Claudia, Carmel, New York, the great WABC. Go.
Hi, Mr. LEVIN. Oh, what an honor for me to get through to you. I just want to thank you so very, very much for your defense of our Constitution and support of the military. I have a now 22-year-old United States Marine, and I love Donald Trump. He's not perfect, but I'm so saddened by the things that go on and disgusted by the politicians who don't support our president.
Mm-hmm. In fact, we have people who not only don't support him, which would be fine. We have people who are trying to destroy him. That's what's not fine.
And that's what's heartbreaking to me, because not all presidents before him were perfect, as we know.
No, and most of the people attacking him are quite imperfect.
Oh, my goodness. I can't even stand the sound of Chuck Schumer's voice. And it just disheartens me because he's our president no matter what. Mm-hmm. And I have a son who's willing to serve, and it just makes me sick. And I just want to thank you so, so much. And you give me hope.
Well, first of all, thank your wonderful family for their service, and you too. And you be strong. There's millions and millions of us who are behind you, okay?
I appreciate you so much. Thank you so very much.
Well, you're a
God
sweetheart.
Bless you.
You too. Thank you. All right. There it is. My call screen's back. Let us go to Mark, Wilmington, North Carolina, the great WAAV. Go ahead.
Mark, how are you, sir? Pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
I just had a quick question. Wanted to follow up on what the last caller was talking about as far as the pulse of the country. I know you're really in tune with everything that's going on and everything as far as but do you really
come on, spit it out, baby. We're going to run out of time. Go ahead.
Now, do you really understand what would have happened or what could have happened if Hillary had been elected?
What are you talking about? I talk about it all the time.
No, I'm talking about a total military march on the Washington, D.C.
No, there would not have been a military march on Washington, D.C.
Sir, I beg you.
Get off the phone, you idiot. You're calling the wrong person. Military march on what? What is he talking about, Mr. Producer? Do you have any idea? Military march on the military's going to march on Washington, D.C.? And do what? I mean, come on, stay within the in the world of the reasonable, will you? There's enough crap going on out there that's extreme. You don't have to manufacture it. All right. Let's go to Steve, Long Island, the great WABC. Go ahead.
Hey, Mark. It's an honor speaking to you. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you.
Mark, Mark, I have a question. I made an observation that, if you could simplify what this country is divided about, it basically comes down to, the right is looking at it from a logical perspective, whereas the left is looking at it from an emotional perspective. Almost like a married couple that can't get along. I mean, where do you see, the question is, how do you see us coming together, the two sides?
All right, two things. Number one, I think the followers of the leaders of the statist progressives may be emotional, but I don't consider the people at the top of the pecking order to be emotional at all. I consider them to be very diabolical, very clever, very mechanical in what they're doing, strategic. I know who their intellectuals are. I know who their past intellectuals are, and so they're not emotional at all.
Yes,
but they hold on now.
Go ahead.
But their followers are, for the most part.
Yeah.
And that's not enough to say they're just emotional. It's even more than that. Their mindsets have been altered from a mindset that was, that Americans are independent, they're self-sufficient, that there's free will. I mean, I have callers in this program say, I have a right to health care. I have a right to education. I have a right to that. I have a right to that. Like zombies.
Yeah.
And how do we come together? I don't know. I'm not Rodney King, and I can't tell you how we come together or if we come together. Over some issues, I don't want us to come together. Like, let's take one big example in our history, slavery. You don't come together. You defeat the evil. And this is part of the problem when people say we should just talk. There's certain things you can just talk about and certain things you can't just talk about. Certain things are evil. So I don't know how we come together, quote unquote. One of the reasons I think there's a great divide in this country now is finally, millions and millions of us are pushing against this statist progressivism before it's too late. Sir, thank you for your call. Now, today at Pearl Harbor, 55 coffins with remains in them from American heroes were returned to the United States. And there'll be extensive DNA testing to determine exactly who these heroes are. There are over 7,000 missing in the Korean War. I can never forgive the family that runs that country for what they did. Never. And what they're doing today. And when you watch those 55 caskets, as I did during the break, it breaks your heart. This is why you need an incredibly powerful military, the most powerful on the face of the earth. This is not up for debate. And I'm sick and tired of people who view us as imperialists, as colonialists, that we start wars. These are people who've never gone to war, who've never had family members go to war, who've never had family members with horrific casualties who've died in war. And I'm sorry to say this is a growing mentality within the Republican Party, the Code Pink Republicans. And I reject it completely. And I will continue to reject it. When we show power, when we show might, our enemies fold. We are not imperialists, we are not colonialists. If we were, we'd own half the globe now. We would conquer Central and South America. If we were, Canada would be a 51st state. If we were, Cuba would be an American island. If we were, much of Europe would be under our control, the way the Soviets had much of Europe under their control. I'm sick and tired of this country being put down. I really am. Not talking about the federal government. I'm sick and tired of this country being put down. Understand, when this country's put down, they're intending to put down the American people. This is why, when these multimillionaire pampered sports athletes take a knee, you and me are disgusted. Because we think about those men and women. We think about those caskets that came off the plane. We think about what goes on in a foxhole in combat. Because we've had family members, or in some cases, many of you have actually done it. And to watch, I watched this LeBron James interview. The man is among the most popular people in the country. He's extraordinarily wealthy, playing basketball. He hasn't done anything to protect this country. He hasn't done anything to protect this country. He talks, and most of us haven't, and he talks about the president dividing us. No, Mr. James, it's your colleagues in the sports world taking a knee. They've divided us. It's your hero, Barack Obama. He divided us. It's your political party that lives on division, balkanization, tribalization, that has divided us. It is your party, the party of slavery 150 years ago, the party of segregation 50 years ago, the party of democratic socialism today that divides the country. See, Mr. James, we are not a racist country. You should be listening to Shelby Steele and others who make the case over and over again. We are all free in this country, all of us. The hard work's been done. Civil War's been fought. The Civil Rights Movement was fought. We're a free people. Embrace it. Embrace it. There's this debate that goes on all the ESPN channels from time to time on whether LeBron James is the greatest basketball player ever or Michael Jordan. And it's hands down Michael Jordan. You want to know why? Because Michael Jordan understands the American people better than LeBron James. Being the greatest anything means being great in every way. Not just on the court, and people can debate the stats and debate the era and so forth, but it's off the court too. LeBron James is a leftist, and he wants you to know about it. And he can't stand Trump, and he wants you to know about it. I believe Michael Jordan is a liberal, and he's a Democrat. I know he liked to play golf with Obama, but I don't know much else about his politics. That's why he was the greatest basketball player ever. His skills on and off the court. I'll be right back.